Oh boy.
When I wake up each day, I feel so weary. Try to face the world, but it's so dreary. But I found that special thing that makes me cheery. Time to do music theory. Music theory.
You're watching Adventures in Music Theory with your host, Dr. Robbins. So welcome to today's installment of Online Music Theory. Word on the street is that you find people have a test coming up on Monday, April the 6th on Unit 11, which is about inverted triads, both first and second inversion. And we've recently been talking about second inversion triads, which is what these homework assignments tend to focus on. So let's go over the homework assignments from the end of Unit 11 here. This is assignment 4. I've got it projected on the slide for you, and you can see that the chords are written down underneath, so you have a sense of what the answer is for the Roman numerals and the pop chords. To talk a little bit more about it, that first second inversion chord, the E chord with B in the bass, is a 5-6-4 chord in the key of A minor, and it's a passing 6-4 chord. And as is the case with all passing 6-4 chords, the thing that makes it apparent is the bass line moving up through it by steps, going from A to B in the E, G, B chord, and then to the A, C, E chord at the end where C is the bass note. So that A, B, C stepwise motion is the passing 6-4 motion there. And if you look at the end of this example, there's another passing 6-4 chord going in the other direction, where there's a first inversion A minor chord with C in the bass that goes to the E minor chord with B in the bass, and then moves on down by step to that A sharp. This is how passing 6-4 chords work. Their bass is approached by step and left by step in the same direction, like passing tones. Hope that makes sense. And here from our buddy Robert Schumann, we have an example that has some neighbor 6-4 chords, or if you chose to call them pedal 6-4 chords, don't feel bad about that. That would also be a correct way of categorizing them. But remember, the way a neighbor 6-4 chord works, or a pedal 6-4 chord works, is that if you're thinking about it as a pedal 6-4 chord, you're noticing how the bass line doesn't change through the 6-4 progression. So when it's a 1-6-4, then to a 4, or a 1 chord, then to a 4-6-4, and then to a root position 1 chord, that A stays in the bass the whole time like a pedal tone. And in the third measure there, where it goes from an E chord to a second inversion A chord with E in the bass, and into another root position E chord, that E stays in the bass the whole time. And of course, if you were inclined to call it a neighbor 6-4 chord, you'd probably be calling it that because you were focusing on the fact that the upper voices above it go up by step in the second measure there, from the C to the E to the D and the F, and then back down by step to the C and the E again, like upper neighbor tones. Or if you look at the third measure, it's where the notes go from G sharp and B up by step to A and C, and then back down by step to G sharp and B again. But either way, you can see how those neighbor 6-4 chords work there. And here, since we can never get too many neighbor or pedal 6-4 chords, we have another example from that beloved Christmas carol, Silent Night. And if you look at the bass line, again you can see how in that 1-4-6-4-1 progression, the C in the bass stays constant, like a pedal tone. And if you look at the upper voices, you can see how they function like upper neighbor tones. The E and the G go up by step to the F and the A, and the F chord with C in the bass, and then they come back down by step to the E and the G and the C chord that's in root position. Classic pedal or neighbor 6-4 chord behavior. Okay, so let's try some part writing now. In the workbook, we have these examples where we're given Roman numerals and figure bass, and we're asked to write soprano, alto, tenor, bass progressions for them. So there are a few steps to go through with this, and to start I'm going to be very, very methodical about it. The first thing you want to do anytime you're doing something like this, figure out what notes are in the chords. If you're in the key of F, a 1 chord has F and A and C. A 5 chord has C and E and G. So you need to know what notes go into each one of those Roman numeral chords. And if you want, you can even do what I've done in the blue down there, and you can go through and you can write out the notes that are in each chord. You want to get off that habit eventually, but in the early days, I suppose it's okay if you need to. Notice also in each chord, there's a letter that's boldface and underlined. That's going to be the note that goes into the bass voice. If it's a root position chord, it's going to be the bottom note. If it's a second inversion chord, it's going to be the top note, because that's the fifth. If it's a first inversion chord, it's going to be the middle note, because that's the third. But once you've figured out your chords, the next thing you want to do is actually write the bass part. So go through and pull out those notes that would be the bass note in each chord, and write them in like those red notes on the staff are showing now. We've got this nice little bass line that goes F, G, A, B flat, up by steps. And then we're going to do some very specific things about 6/4 chords. This is a passing 6/4 chord. So a passing 6/4 chord has that stepwise bass motion, which is the F, G, A here. And remember, there's that thing called a voice exchange, where some voice above the stepwise bass is going to be doing that same thing in reverse. So while the bass is going F, G, A through that passing 6/4 progression, somebody in the upper voices needs to be going A, G, F. And if you look at what we've got from the way the first chord's set up, you realize the place where that's going to need to happen is in the tenor voice. So let's go ahead and write in the tenor voice the A, G, F there. And we're halfway through our passing 6/4 progression. The next thing we need to do is there's a common tone for a passing 6/4 chord progression. There's a note that's in the passing 6/4 chord that's also in the chord before it and after it. And in this case, that note is C. So I want to write C in the same voice in all three chords. So it looks like it's going to be in the soprano voice from the way this is set up. Like that, what the green notes are showing. And then the final thing is passing 6/4 progressions usually have a lower neighbor figure, a voice that goes down a step and then comes back up by a step to the original note. So that's going to be the alto voice here. It's going to be F down to E and back up to F. Remember the passing 6/4 song from a couple lessons ago? Bass goes up or goes down, common tone, neighbor tone. That's all there. If you look at it and you think about that song, then the bass goes up part is the bass voice. The or goes down part is the tenor voice. The common tone part, of course, is the soprano, and then the neighbor tone part is the alto. And then all we need to do is write our last chord, our first inversion 2 chord, without creating any sort of bad parallel problems or anything. So if you set the chord up like I've got it set up there, that'll finish you out nicely. Let's look at the next one. This is a cadential 6/4 chord progression, so we need to act a little bit differently. But the first thing we need to do is still figure out what notes are in the chords. And in the key of A major, a 1 chord has A and C sharp and E, and a 5 chord has E and G sharp and B. And again, down there in the blue at the bottom of the screen, I've written out the notes in each chord, and I've underlined and bold-faced which note is going to be in the bass voice. Because the first thing you probably want to do is write out the bass voice. So there we go, 2 E's and an A. Then the next thing we need to do is specific stuff for cadential 6/4 chords. Remember that in the cadential 6/4 chord, there are 2 upper voices that tend to move down by step to notes in the 5 chord. So if we've got an A C sharp E chord going to an E G sharp B chord, then the notes that should move down by step are there's a C sharp that should go down to a B, and that would be what would happen in the tenor voice. And there would be an A that should go down to a G sharp, and that would happen in the soprano voice, like that. And what about the alto? We're going to keep the alto on E along with the bass. We're going to double the fifth in the 6/4 chord, and then we're just going to keep that E there as a common tone, and we'll connect that last 5 chord to the 1 chord that ends the example like such. Let's move on to the next one. So what do we have here? We have a progression that has both a pedal or a neighbor 6/4 chord in it and a cadential 6/4 chord in it. So let's get working on this one. Again, the first step is always figure out what notes are in your chords. Know that in a 1 chord in G minor you have G and B flat and D. In a 4 chord you have C and E flat and G. And of course the other thing we need to know is how do we behave in a neighbor 6/4 chord progression. And the thing that happens is the bass voice stays on the same note all the way through like a pedal tone. So we can see that's happening there. And the other thing that needs to happen is there are going to be 2 upper voices that go up by step and come back down by step. And that's going to happen in the soprano and the tenor here. If they go up by step to E flat and C, then we'll have our C minor chord. That's the 4/6/4 chord. And if they come back down by step to B flat and D, that'll get us back to the original 1 chord. And as for the alto voice there, we're just going to double the bass note. We'll keep them both on G. Then when we go to our cadential 6/4 chord, we're going to have D in the bass. It's a D, B flat, and G chord. And we want to make sure the note we double is the 5th of the chord, the D. And of course the other thing we want to make sure we do is we want to make sure we resolve 2 of the upper voices down by step to notes that are in the 5 chord. The 5 chord's a D, F sharp, A chord. So what that's going to look like is when I set up my 1/6/4 chord, it's going to be a G, B flat, D chord with D in the bass, and the G and the B flat are going to move down by steps to the F sharp and the A. That's going to happen in the soprano and alto voices. That's what the green notes are showing. The tenor voice is going to double the bass throughout, staying on D. And then we just go to our last chord there and move things by step where they can, and that avoids parallel problems. And then there's another progression at the end there that has a passing 6/4 chord progression in it. So let's see what we can do with that. The first thing we need to do is just get from the 1 chord to the second or the first inversion 4 chord. And once we get to that first inversion 4 chord, we want to provide the voice exchange in the passing 6/4 progression. This is a passing 6/4 progression where the bass goes down. It goes A and then G sharp is the bass note for our passing 6/4 chord, and then F sharp is where the next chord is, the 4 chord is. So while the bass is going A, G sharp, F sharp, somebody needs to go F sharp, G sharp, A. The alto would be a good voice to have do that. So we'll go ahead and put the alto doing the bass part in reverse. And then we need to find our common tone for our passing 6/4 progression. Well, the 1 chord is an F sharp A C sharp chord, and the other chord is a C sharp E G sharp chord. So it sounds like C sharp is our common tone, and it looks like a sensible thing to do would be to keep C sharp in the soprano part like that. And of course, if you're thinking about bass goes up or goes down, common tone, neighbor tone, then the last thing we need to do is put in that neighbor tone idea. And we'll put that in the tenor voice, where we'll have a voice that goes F sharp, E, and then back up to F sharp. Like that. And the final step is just get from the 4 chord to the 5 chord at the end there. And remember, if you're going from 4 to 5, and you're in root position, then you want your upper voices to go in contrary motion, down by step or small leaps. So the other thing too is, remember, in a minor key, if you want your 5 chord to be major, you have to raise the 7th note up and make it the leading tone. So that's what that 5 chord's going to look like. Okay, and here we have a rather substantial chord progression. It's 3 measures long, and it's got about 8 or 9 chords for us to deal with. And all we have is Roman numerals and figured bass. So first step, figure out the notes in the chords. In B flat, one chord has B flat, D, and F in it. A 4 chord has E flat, G, and B flat in it. If you want to write down the letter names underneath, like I've got in blue there, go right ahead. And I've gone ahead and I've underlined and bold-faced which pitch is going to be in the bass voice. Because the next thing we want to do, the best voice to write first, is the bass voice. So let's go ahead and write out the bass part. Again, there in blue are our chord symbols, and it's showing us which note should go in the bass. So let's go ahead and put those underlined pitches as our bass notes, like that. Then what do we do? Well, the next thing we should do is set up the first chord. We need to add the tenor and the alto and the soprano to it. I've set it up on the screen there in close structure. You can put it any way you want, but that's how I've got it set up. It doesn't matter how you set up the first chord, but that will determine how you go to the next chord, because this is a pedal 6/4 progression, and the bass is doing what it should be doing by staying on the same pitch like a pedal tone. So what we need to have happen is, remember that when we go from the 1 chord to the 4 chord and back to the 1 chord, we're going to have 2 upper voices that go up a step and then back down a step, like upper neighbor tones. And those 2 upper voices are going to be the inner voices, the alto and the tenor. The alto is going to go F, G, F, and the tenor is going to go D, E flat, D. And the soprano is going to double the bass note in the 6/4 chord, because we always double the bass note in 6/4 chords, and then it'll stay on B flat in the 1 chord. So that's how we'll write our pedal 6/4 progression, is like that. Then the next step is simply to just do part writing the way we always do. These are just first inversion and root position chords coming up next. So we just need to write in such a way that doesn't create problems such as parallel fifths or octaves or spacing problems or anything like that. One thing to watch for is in that 5/6 chord at the end of the first measure, don't double the A. Remember, A is the leading tone in B flat, and you don't want to double the leading tone. But we'll write up through that first, or that root position 4 chord, and once we get there, we're ready for our next 6/4 chord. It's a passing 6/4 chord. So with passing 6/4 progressions, it's always a good idea to think about what the bass is doing. The bass is going E flat, F, G here, so there needs to be some voice doing that backwards. Some voice going G, F, E flat. And if you look at how that 4 chord's set up, you realize that's going to be the job of the alto. The alto is going to go G, F, E flat, while the bass goes E flat, F, G. The common tone between the 4 chord and the 1 chord is the B flat, so we're going to keep that in the tenor. And then the lower neighbor thing is going to happen in the soprano, where the soprano is going to go E flat, D, and back to E flat. Like that. And that gets us to our cadential 6/4 chord that's the next to last chord here. Cadential 6/4 chords are on strong beats, which is what's happening here. This one's on beat 1. And remember, we want to double the bass note. We want to double the fifth of that B flat D F chord. We're going to double the F, and then there are going to be 2 voices that are on B flat and D, and those 2 voices need to move down by step to notes in the 5 chord, to C and A. Like that. Does that make sense? These next part writings don't give us Roman numerals. They just give us figured bass symbols, and we need to be able to figure out how to write from figured bass. It's been a while since we did that, so this will be a good refresher for us. So if you look at the first progression, I've given you the soprano voice and the bass voice, and I've put the alto and tenor in the first chord, but then you need to fill in the alto and tenor for the rest of this. And it's not that hard, because the figured bass things are telling you what to do. Remember, figured bass numbers are literally always telling us about numbers that need to happen above the bass voice. So if there's a 6, it means there's a sixth above that D. So all you got to know is what note's a sixth above D. It's a B. If there's a 4 and the bass note's D, it means there's a fourth somewhere above that D. And whenever we have those little dashed lines or hyphens connecting two numbers, that means that needs to all happen in the same voice. So the fact that the 6 is connected to a 5 means the sixth above the bass needs to go to a fifth above the bass, and the fourth above the bass needs to go to a third above the bass. You'll see this figure a lot, especially for cadential 6/4 chords, which is what this is, by the way. But a sixth above D is B, and a fifth above D is A, so you need to go write those somewhere. A good place to write them would be in the tenor voice, because you don't have to skip that around very much to do that. So we'll put B and A in the tenor voice, and that takes care of the 6/5 part. A fourth and a third above D would be a G going to an F, and you can see how that's going to fit real easily in the alto voice, which is already on G. And then since there's a 4, that means there's a fourth above that D in the bass, so that's a G, and it moves to a third above the D in the bass, which is an F sharp. And you can see how the alto is a good place for that to happen. And from there we just need to do our final chord. And a lot of times stepwise motion is a smart move. What we might find is that what works nicely is to move the tenor on down by step to a G and let the alto skip down to a D, so we have a complete G major chord at the end there. And if you look at that chord progression, you can realize if we were in the key of G, then we would have just written a 1-6-4 to a 5 chord that ended on a 1 chord. And a 1-6-4 going to a 5 is what a cadential 6/4 chord is like. And if you look at that one, you'll see it has all the signs. It's got two voices moving down by step to the 5 chord. It's on a stronger beat than the 5 chord is, and the bass is doubled. Classic cadential 6/4 chord stuff. And let's look at what's happening at the end of that line now. We have another 6/4 followed by 5/3 in our figured bass. So we're going to do some things the same and some things different. But again, the numbers just mean intervals. 6 means there's a sixth above that E in the bass, so that's going to be a C sharp in this case. And 5 means there's going to be a B above the E in the bass. It would make good sense to have that sixth and fifth in the tenor voice, since the tenor is already close to C sharp. So you might write in the tenor part like that. And that takes care of the 6 and 5 part of our figures. And if you look at the bottom parts of the figures, there's a 4 and a 3. And that means there's a fourth above the E in the bass, which is going to be an A. And that means there's going to be a third above the E in the bass, which is going to be G sharp. And it would make sense to put those pitches in the alto voice. And what we've got here is we have what appears to be a pedal or a neighbor 6/4 progression. The bass is the same note before and after the 6/4 chord. I've written my alto and tenor voices by going up by step and then back down by step, like upper neighbor tones. And if I was going to add in the soprano voice, I would probably just write the soprano voice in and keep it on E there to get a complete final chord. So that's how we do 6/4 chords. The big thing for part writing any 6/4 chord is double the bass note. That's going to be the fifth of the chord. And of course the other thing is know what type of 6/4 chord you're dealing with. That's why it's important when we do harmonic analysis that we put the P's or the C's or whatever underneath them, so we identify whether they're passing or cadential or pedal or neighbor. And likewise, when we're doing the part writing, you want to know which type you're doing so you know how to approach writing for it and what to do. It's important to understand that cadential 6/4 chords have that downward resolution to the 5 chord. Pedal 6/4 chords have that upper neighbor motion where two voices go up a step and then back down. passing 6/4 chords have that voice exchange action where while the bass goes D, E, F or whatever, some voice above it goes F, E, D in contrary motion. Okay, and let's go through these last ones a good bit quicker. Probably what we need to review here most might be some figure bass things that have been forgotten. I've already gone through and filled in possible ways you could add upper voices to these, but let's look at what we've got. Number 3 there is a cadential 6/4, and what you might be wondering about is the sharp symbol next to the 6. Remember, in figure bass, whenever there's like a sharp or a flat next to a number, it means put that accidental on that number above the bass. So a sixth above A is F, so that means on the F, make sure there's a sharp, like that. And of course, everything else that's happening there then is, what we would expect for a passing 6/4 progression. If you look at the bass voice, it's moving up in steps, so the soprano voice is going in contrary motion in reverse. While the bass is going G, A, B, the soprano is going B flat, A, G. If you look at the next example, number 4, that's a pedal 6/4 progression, and there's our bass voice acting like a pedal tone, and there are 2 voices above it, the tenor and the soprano, acting like upper neighbor tones, going up by step and back down by step. And of course, the alto is just doubling the bass throughout, which tends to happen in pedal 6/4 progressions. Looking at the bottom system at number 5, it's a cadential 6/4. And it's got that same symbol we were seeing earlier, the 6/4 going to 5/3, showing how the voices should move. It means there's a voice above the bass that's a sixth above it that goes to a note that's a fifth above it. So that's the soprano. That's the F moving to the E while the bass note is A, right? A to F is a sixth, A to E is a fifth. And then the other thing that's happening is the 4- sharp sign business, and this is another one of those figure bass things we may have lost track of. But remember, whenever there's like a sharp sign or a flat sign or a natural sign and there's not a number directly next to it, it means add that number on the third above the bass, which is the C in this case. And then our final one over there is another passing 6/4 progression. The bass is going down A, G, F. So one thing we'd want to look for is a voice going in reverse F, G, A. That's the alto right there. And finally, let's go over the last homework assignment. I don't have a lot to say about this because I'm sharing the answers on the screen with you. The analysis in this one is a little bit more tricky simply because there are more non-chord tones and because we're looking at a piano work instead of a soprano, alto, tenor, bass choral setting. But if you go and look, you'll see what's going on there. If we change chords every 2 beats, then there's a G minor chord that goes to a D major chord in second inversion, and then it goes to a first inversion G minor chord, which means we go G, A, B flat through our bass line, which is one of those things we look for in a passing 6/4 progression, that stepwise motion through the 6/4 chord. And then it happens again on the second line down there, where we go C minor to second inversion G minor to first inversion C minor, and our bass voice steps up going C, D, E flat. Now the passage at the bottom of the page, which is actually from that same piece, is something that's a little bit more interesting. It's a passage in C major. I've gone through and labeled the chords. That 1/6/4 chord is a cadential 6/4 chord, but pay close attention to it because Beethoven does something interesting there. Notice how he's resolving it. Since he's going from 1/6/4 to 5/7, he's actually moving his voices up by step from E to F and C to D rather than moving his voices down by step. This can happen sometimes, although usually cadential 6/4 chords tend to resolve down by step. But there is something in the chapter in your book about how sometimes composers have upward resolutions in cadential 6/4 chords. And of course, this is still a cadential 6/4 chord even with the resolution going up, because if you look at it, you'll see that it's doing all the other things right. It's coming before the 5 chord in a cadence. It's a 1-6-4 chord, and it's on a stronger beat than the 5 chord. So it's got everything right for cadential 6-4 chord. And for this final passage from the Beethoven Sonata, which I'm having you analyze in E minor, we have some pedal or neighbor 6-4 chords. And again, the main thing that's tricky about this is simply that it's piano music and the chords are being played as arpeggios and not being done as quarter notes or half notes as we'd find in a choral texture. But if you go looking at it, you'll see the things that we expect to find in this type of progression. There's the pedal tone in the bass, which is the same before and after the 6-4 chords. The bass part stays on B throughout. And if you're thinking neighbor 6-4 and you want to see the things that are doing the upper neighbor motion, it happens in both hands, but I'm going to show it to you in the right hand part, in the treble clef. You can see that F sharp in the B chord moves up to the G in the E minor chord and then back down to the F sharp in the next B chord. And the D sharp in the B chord moves up to the E in the E minor chord and then back down to the D sharp in the B chord. So there are those things we look for in a pedal 6-4 progression or a neighbor 6-4 progression. And looking at the part writings that I've given you, again, the figure bass symbols might be the trickiest thing to deal with. The sharp or the natural symbol in front of the 6 in that first measure means the 6th above the bass note should have a natural, and a 6th above a G is an E. So we make that E flat in the key signature into E natural. And in the next measure, the natural signs underneath the 5s, that means two different things. The 5 means there's a 5th above the bass note, so that's the G that's above the C in the bass. And the natural sign means that the 3rd above the bass needs to have a natural on it. And that's because there's not a number directly next to the natural sign. So those natural signs in the second measure mean put a natural sign on the note that's a 3rd above C. That would be the E. What we've got there is we've got a passing 6-4 progression in the first measure. Notice the bass going F, G, A flat, while the soprano goes A flat, G, F. And in the second measure, we've got a neighbor 6-4 or a pedal 6-4 on the last 3/8 notes of the measure. The bass stays on C like a pedal tone, the alto doubles it, and the tenor and the soprano move up by step and back down from G to A to G and E natural to F to E natural. So I think we've covered some good ground here, and look, there's our calendar again, which is reminding us, among other things, that there is a test scheduled on Unit 11 for Monday, April 6th. Let's talk a little bit about how that test is going to work. As I said, it's going to be on Monday. It should be available as soon as Monday gets here. I believe starting at midnight on Monday, it will be available. I want you to do the test on Monday and return it to me no later than 12 a.m. on Tuesday. In other words, you have all day Monday to get the test done. It should not take more than an hour to an hour and a half maximum for you to do that. So don't spend more than an hour and a half on the test. But I don't believe you're going to need that much time. It's not that long of a test. It is not open book or open notes. You need to just be able to do this with what you have stored in your brain. And after you're finished with the test, I want you to send me via email, my campus email, send me a PDF of the test or a picture of the test, whatever. Just make sure if it's a picture that I can actually read it. And I will get those graded and back to you shortly. If you want to know what the test is like, it's a short test. It's got some harmonic analysis on it. Give pop chords, give Roman numerals and figure bass, circle the non-chord tones, and of course the big thing that we haven't done in analysis on a test before is if there are 6-4 chords, make sure you mark them as cadential or passing or neighbor or pedal or whatever. If you don't do that, I'm going to count points off. So make sure you mark that. It's important to always identify what type of 6/4 chord it is. But the test will have a harmonic analysis. It will have a part writing on it. And the part writing might be one where I give you Roman numerals and figured bass. I might give you a pop chord chart to write the chords from, or I might give you a bass line already written out in notation and put figured bass symbols beneath it. But at any rate, that's how that's going to be done. Harmonic analysis, part writing, and then a few brief short answer questions. The whole thing fits on one page. And there is a practice test and the answers to the practice test, and they are posted on Moodle, and they will be available Thursday and Friday before the test on Monday. Okay, so get down to studying. If you have questions, send them to me via email or Google Chat, and we will do what we can. I will see you on the next video. Good luck on the test. Wash your hands.